Imagine a room with no sound, 2 newborns, placed in cribs, fed, kept warm, never spoken to, never sung to, no lullaby, no whispered name, just the breath of a caretaker instructed, above all else, to remain silent. The question behind this silence is one of the oldest and most dangerous in human history. If you strip away every language a child has ever heard, what word, if any, rises naturally from within them? Is there a tongue woven into our very nature? A primal speech? The Ursprache, the original tongue. This is the forbidden experiment, and it has been conducted more than once. We travel back 26 centuries to the court of Pharaoh Psamtik I of Egypt. According to the historian Herodotus, Psamtik was consumed by a question of national pride. Which civilization was the oldest on earth? To find the answer, he devised a trial. He took 2 infants from ordinary families and gave them to a shepherd in a remote area. The shepherd was given strict orders. No one was to speak a single word in their presence. They were to live in a hut, fed by goats, in total linguistic isolation. Psamtik waited, convinced that the first word these children uttered would be the mother tongue of humanity. 2 years passed. One day, as the shepherd opened the door, both children ran toward him, hands outstretched, crying out a single word, Bekos. Psamtik investigated. He discovered that Bekos was the word for bread in Phrygian, a language spoken in what is now Turkey. The pharaoh, though disappointed that the answer wasn't Egyptian, accepted the result. He declared Phrygian to be the original language of mankind. The search for the first language didn't end in Egypt. It haunted the monarchs of Europe for centuries. In the late 1400s, King James IV of Scotland conducted his own version. He reportedly sent 2 infants to the isolated Isle of Inchkeith in the Firth of Forth. They were placed in the care of a woman who was mute, ensuring they would never hear the sound of a human voice. The king's goal was the same, to hear the natural language of man. When the children were finally brought back to the mainland years later, the chronicles of the time made a startling claim. They spoke very good Hebrew. To the medieval and Renaissance mind, this made perfect sense. Hebrew was the language of the Garden of Eden. It was the tongue spoken by Adam and Eve before the Tower of Babel shattered human speech into 1,000 fragments. James IV believed he had bypassed the fall of man and touched the divine. But there is another story, one that is less like a legend and more like a warning. In the late 16th century, the Mughal Emperor Akbar the Great, a man of immense curiosity and intellect, decided to test the same theory. But Akbar was a skeptic. He didn't believe in a divine language. He believed that language was something learned, something social. He built a special structure called the Gang Mahal, the House of Silence. He placed a group of infants inside, cared for by nurses who were forbidden from speaking to them, even in whispers. Unlike the stories of Psamtik or James, Akbar's experiment ended in chilling silence. When the children grew up, they did not speak Phrygian. They did not speak Hebrew. They did not speak at all. They communicated only through gestures and cries. They were, as Akbar had suspected, linguistically hollow. He had discovered a dark truth. Language is not a seed that sprouts in the dark. It is a mirror. Without someone to speak to us, we cannot find our own voice. What these historical experiments touched upon, modern science has confirmed through tragic real-world cases. In the 20th century, the case of Genie, a girl kept in total isolation by her parents for 13 years, revealed the existence of what linguists call the critical period. There is a window in human development, a biological clock that begins at birth and starts to close around puberty. If a child is not exposed to language during this window, the parts of the brain responsible for grammar and syntax begin to repurpose themselves. The window slams shut. Genie was eventually rescued and taught words, but she could never master the structure of language. The original tongue wasn't missing. The machinery to build it had simply withered away. Linguist Noam Chomsky proposed that we are born with a language acquisition device, a biological blueprint for grammar. But like any blueprint, it requires materials to build. It requires the sound of a mother's voice, the rhythm of a story, the simple act of being named. We are the only species on this planet that dreams in words. We are the only creatures who can use a sequence of sounds to transport a thought from one mind into another across time and space. The forbidden experiment failed in every form it took because it asked the wrong question. It assumed that language was something inside a person, a seed waiting to sprout in silence. But language is not inside us. It is between us. It lives in the gap between one mouth and another ear. In the moment, a parent points at the moon and a child, for the first time, looks up. Psamtik heard Bekos and called it proof of the oldest civilization. James heard Hebrew and called it the voice of Eden. Akbar heard nothing and called it failure. But the real discovery was this: there is no original tongue. There is only the original act. The act of reaching toward another human being and speaking, not because you must, but because you cannot bear the silence. Language is not our oldest biological trait. It is our deepest social one. It is the thing that happens when two nervous systems decide to trust each other with sound. And whatever you call that, Phrygian, Hebrew, Sanskrit, or the first murmur of a child who has never been given a name for what they feel, it is not a word from the beginning of time. It is the beginning of time. Every single time it happens. If language is what makes us human, then curiosity is what keeps us so. Subscribe so you never miss the next word.